Hi, everyone. We are now in our next panel, which is called Leave the Fish in the Sea. With me, I have Tom Johansson, who is the co-founder and CEO of Hooked Foods based in Sweden. Tom worked at the Boston Consulting Group and Procter & Gamble before realizing the massive challenges facing the fishing industry. He co-founded Hooked in 2019, and today the startup has launched a plant-based tuna into the market called Tunish, with more products on the way. I also have Arye Elfenbein, who is the co-founder of Wildtype based in San Francisco, where he directs the company's scientific research. Arye studied to be a doctor at Dartmouth and ended up going to Kyoto University for his PhD. He was there when the scientific discovery was made that stem cells could be created from other cells and not just embryos, which changed the trajectory of his career and led him to starting Wildtype, which is using cell-based agriculture to make a salmon sashimi alternative. The company has not launched its product yet, but has a sushi counter in their lab where you can have a taste. So Arye, I would love to get started with you and acknowledge that cell-based agriculture is a pretty nascent field and that you were early in the game. So how did you learn about this space and why start a company in it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it really is early days for this field. I actually grew up in Australia and was visiting there and was back in places where it used to be rainforest and is now kind of used for cattle farming, and was thinking about this idea of, do we need animals to create meat, which is a sort of strange question because we always imagine that that's, of course, where meat comes from. And I had worked in Kyoto on stem cell regenerative medicine research, and had just sort of thought about, like, we understand so much about how cells communicate with each other, how they organize together and mature, and maybe we can just do this outside of the animal. And it turns out I was not the first person to think of this, and realized that another cardiologist, Mark Post, who had actually worked with in the early 2000s, and I had no idea that he had been working on creating a hamburger in this way. He had unveiled the world's first hamburger, created entirely outside of the animal in 2013. And the first ever conference about this was going to take place in 2015. And I was just riveted. And I went, and it was just a room full of, the strangest sort of group of people you would imagine. Everyone from the world of finance to scientists to anthropologists to just people who are interested like me. And that's really sort of, what changed it for me.
And Tom, for you, you had a background in consulting and big food, or what do you call it, fast-moving consumer good companies. Why did you decide to start a company within the food and fish space?
Yeah, you got it. I come from more the commercial side, but I grew up in a family business out in the Swedish archipelago here in Stockholm. Always been close to the ocean, and always eaten a lot of seafood, but being close to the commercial side, I also realized the potential in these categories growing rapid speed, much faster than any other category, even though it's early days. Seeing Oatly heroing out of Sweden to Super Bowl in the US, and then also, of course, Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, all these great companies making a huge difference in the world, sustainability wise, but also building really inspiring companies. But there's no alternative fish that was plant-based, at least not in Europe or in Sweden. Realized that potential, combine them with my own passion to eat seafood myself and find eating more sustainable, but still keeping that seafood experience in my diet, so to speak. So yeah, I guess that's the background why we founded a company of Hooked.
And both of you decided to start with different types of fish. So Arye, I'd love to start with why salmon, and then hear from you, Tom, about why you started with tuna.
Yeah, a few reasons for salmon. I'd say, first of all, it's, we wanted to create a product that will have some amount of impact. And salmon is the second most consumed seafood in the US, at least, after shrimp. It's also, one of the healthier foods. It's also a very very versatile food. So salmon is one of the fish that, you can enjoy as a minced salmon and sort of like a salmon sushi roll, to sashimi, to a salmon steak, to lox on a bagel. And so we wanted to sort of have that versatility as well, as we sort of thought about what our first product would be.
Tom, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, we have the same approach. We are, all the strategic choices that we make, we base on our mission to lead the transition to a more healthy marine ecosystem. So we want to make as much absolute impact as possible, and then it's very natural to look at the most consumed seafood products here in Europe. Shrimp is not the highest in Europe. It's between tuna and salmon, but we're also looking at what is the most problematic in terms of impact. The more impact we can make, and these two are usually correlating quite a lot. If you're over consuming a certain type of fish or seafood, it's usually quite problematic in the process. So we actually looked a lot into shrimp in the beginning, but then pivoted actually to shredded, towards a more shredded product, where tuna was much more natural product to sort of create, because we consume canned tuna, which is a shredded product. It's a lower barrier for consumers to understand what the product we're trying to imitate if it would be shredded. So that's why we pivoted to tuna, and it was also a big problem to solve with overfishing that's circulated around the tuna consumption. But then also actually product wise, it was a much more easy or much more feasible product to develop for us in a price point that was reasonable for the consumers. Back to our mission that we want to create as much absolute impact as possible, and then we believe having a product that makes sense to the consumer, but also having it to a reasonable price point is very, very important for make it as easy for people as possible to start eating more sustainably. So you
mentioned that you pivoted to a shredded product because it was easier for the consumer to understand. Can you talk a little bit about introducing this into the market and how you've been communicating it, what you've been finding to be effective?
Yeah, absolutely. We launched our first product called Tunish in the Swedish market in restaurants only so far, 1st of March. It's been a very interesting experience, but because there is a challenge to be the first one. You really need to educate, you need to talk a lot about why eat plant-based seafood or alternative seafood in the first place. And I think Seaspiracy helped a lot with Netflix, just getting that knowledge out there. Because our strategy is not to maybe educate too much or do it in a way that's boring or make you feel bad as a consumer. It's more about bringing the information to the table so people can take informed choices, but also branding it in a way that's more playful, that has a lot of positive feelings around it, because people don't want to be a part of the problem. They want to be part of the solution or something fun. So I think that's really a strategy we are going for, at least with Hooked, creating a community, a lifestyle that people want to be a part of, at the same time as you're lifting up this information that the seafood industry might have talked a lot about from their narrative, that maybe seafood isn't that sustainable. There's challenges with mercury and overfishing that we need to talk about, that they of course don't want to raise on a similar level. So I think having a positive vibe but still giving a consumer the right and correct information is the way to go.
And for Wildtype, you've also focused on a particular food experience, sashimi or sushi, in terms of how you're presenting your salmon. What was the thinking around that?
Yeah, I think, Tom, that's a really great point, and it's a very similar one to the way that we think about this, is we want to have something that's recognizable for people. So it's a starting point for a story. And when it comes to something like sushi or sashimi, that's an instantly recognizable thing. In the case of salmon, there is nothing else that looks like that. And so we wanted to really kind of show what these kinds of technologies are able to do, and for to sort of start the conversation around this is fish. This is just kind of a different source of it. And so, when we think about our, vision for the future, where we have all these different alternatives, where we can still pull fish out of the water, if that's, if there's still a market for that, and hopefully there still will be fish in the ocean for that. And there will be plant-based alternatives, and there'll be sort of cell-based alternatives. And that's kind of, I think, why we wanted to choose something like sashimi to start with. It really sort of is just a recognizable, easy to identify place to begin the sort of conversation.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little bit about how your products are made? So it's with cell-based agriculture, but can you elaborate on what that process looks like, how it works?
Yeah, of course. It's pretty fascinating. It starts with a cell, and so we begin with a cell that can either come from a small, juvenile fish, or from the egg. But that's something we only have to do once. We haven't worked with a live animal in a few years now, as a result. And the cells from there, we basically select for the ones that are able to keep growing, keep regenerating, and have the ability to become, structures like muscle or fat, and so forth. And so we grow these cells in a facility that basically looks like a brewery. So it's these kinds of, tanks, and that we feed the cells the same nutrients that they would have within the fish. So everything from sugars and fats and proteins and minerals. And then these cells grow and grow, and we provide them then with a structure, which is basically like a plant-based sort of mesh of different proteins and sugars, which is basically the same thing that would be between the cells within the fish. And then they sort of grow within that, they organize, they mature, and they're just programmed to do that. It's really in their DNA. And so they sort of align into these fibers and so forth. And that ultimately becomes the product that you can see.
Mm. And Tom, what about for you? What's the process for making the different products you have at Hooked?
It's a slightly different process, but we are using extrusion. So it's essentially a process of the different plant proteins, different mixes, from different plants. And then in this process, we put it under a certain amount of pressure with a certain amount of water, a certain amount of heat, and then during a certain amount of time. And then we have found a very nice formula to create a similar fish structure in the texture. And then we go through an emulsion process where we have found that injection is the most effective one with less waste, with the least waste, to get in the right color and also the right taste, flavor, and smell. So it looks a lot like salmon. And we shred it into different pieces. So it's more of to imitate a cooked fish, a cooked salmon or a cooked tuna, rather than the raw sashimi-like product that Wildtype is developing and producing. So that is the process essentially. So it's more of a shredded, ready-to-eat product that you can use either cold or warm, or in salads and wraps, even in sushi or in pastas, if you would like. That's what it
sounds amazing.
I know. I'm like, can we taste? Can we all meet up and do a virtual taste sometime? But the two of you are operating in different parts of the world, and you're creating your products in slightly different ways. What are the challenges that you're facing right now? What are you up against?
Yeah, I can maybe start. I would say that a lot of it is exactly what Tom was describing, which is, first of all, just one of consumer acceptance. It's a difficult discussion to have around, like, what is this? Is it real fish? Is it not real fish? It was grown outside of a fish. How does that what exactly is in it? And it's always been a very enriching and fulfilling discussion. And just when you see people sort of think about like this question of, do we need fish from the ocean to actually create the same thing on land? And so I'd say consumer acceptance is one, but certainly there are others, particularly for the field of cultivated or cell-based fish. And that is, one around scaling. Nobody has really grown cells at the or certainly not fish cells at the scale that we would need to have any kind of meaningful impact. And then the other is definitely around the cost. When we began this journey in 2016, the costs were absolutely astronomical. And it's been this, slow and difficult process to kind of in some ways take these what were pharmaceutical grade reagents and replace them with food grade reagents, and work through all of the difficulties of scaling up the process. So I'd say those are the main ones today.
Tom, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely the same. Essentially, it's the market in one end to like convince the consumers and inform the consumers in an efficient way, in a fun and positive way, so people understand the problems, but still wants it to be, to take action towards them. So that's one. But then also, of course, the production scaling and just setting up, taking these products from an R&D lab scale to an actual production that should produce, many tons per day. It's that's a challenging process. But I think it's definitely something that we can overcome. There's also a lot of movement in this whole food tech bubble, or whatever you want to call it, that has happened the past few years. It's moving so fast because the capital is interested in this sort of space. The technology is getting better and better, and the market is getting more and more information with documentary like Seaspiracy, but also with more companies becoming bigger. So I think it's definitely moving in that direction, but it's still early days. That is the biggest challenges. I completely agree with Arye.
The other thing you have in common is that you're both now startup founders, but you didn't necessarily study plant science or food science or anything about food production. Arye, your background is within medicine, and now you got here. Can you just talk a little bit about how you made that leap?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that for some reason, three of the founders in this space are cardiologists. So Mark Post is one for Mosa Meats, and Uma Valetti is a cardiologist for Memphis Meats, which is now Upside Foods. And it's sort of this funny, strange, interesting coincidence. I'm not sure if there's a direct reason or correlation, but what's interesting is that this field has needed to bring together groups of people who have never worked together in the past. So everything from biomedical engineers who had just been working on sort of, very small specific pharmaceutical applications, to food scientists, to people working on media or sort of nutrient formulations and scaling processes, to mechanical engineers, to food packers. I mean, it's kind of just such an interesting group of people, and it's been, for me, the most enriching and fulfilling, work of my life for sure. Mostly because of this, because I have learned so much from all the people who've had to come together to make this happen.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, for you? Oh, we lost your audio. I think you're muted. There you go.
There we go. So the vision for the future of the food system, is that right?
More the fact that you took the leap into this space, and it's not necessarily what you studied or where you came from or what you might have thought you would be doing.
Right.
How did you make the leap?
Yeah, I think, it's a good question. I think, I'm coming from a family business and also been doing some other startups in the future, which has been, a fun experience where you learn, you sort of learn that you can sort of achieve everything that you want to do. It's just about getting the information and the right people in the team. So for me, it's to take the leap. It was, when we understood the big challenges with the seafood space and how challenging it is with overfishing the mercury. We asked us these like very fundamental questions in the beginning, like why would we need plant-based seafood? Why doesn't it exist today? All of those questions that we answered and just realized how big this problem actually is and actually needs to be solved quite urgently. We realized let's take action towards this. And then it's just a matter of, working with the best people, the best organizations. We can't save the world on our own. We need to collaborate. So, yeah, that's sort of that was the tipping point, and that was just about meeting the best people essentially to start the journey and move forward essentially.
Mm. And you did bring up a good point as well, which is what your future vision of the food system is. So what would you say to that? Where do you hope we're going to end up?
I mean, I think it's moving in an insane pace right now. Just like 2 years ago when we started, there was a lot of questions. We asked those questions like, why would plant-based seafood be needed? But there was also, we tried to get, startup loans, investor funding, customers. Like there was actually quite low interest of these kind of products in the beginning because, just plant-based meats. I mean, Beyond Meat actually just launched in Sweden for just like a few years ago. Now it feels so natural that it's everywhere in all hamburger restaurants. So it's happening at a very fast pace. And with the capital, with the market, the consumers being more aware, with the production and technology becoming better and better, a lot of talented people wants to work for, purpose-driven startups that wants to change the world to the better. So I think like everything is just moving in that direction. So I think we will see a decade of so many things happening in the food tech space, and especially when we're getting a little bit better scale on it and better prices, and we can even create products, which is very exciting when we reach a point where we create products that are even better than the traditional seafood, that's even tastier, even more healthy at a lower price point. When we start optimizing these products for humans, which we can do in the lab in a much more scientific way, I think that's a very interesting point, and it's just going to go faster and faster. So I think plant-based is going to play a big role in the next coming years. I think cell-based is also going to be a big role. I've seen many reports that are suggesting, alternative proteins to take up to between 10 to 20, in best cases 30% of market share of traditional meats. So I think a lot can happen very fast, but we're also humble for the challenges that we're facing as well. It's a lot to do, but it needs to be done. But everyone is on the same side, it feels like. So very exciting times ahead, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, when we think about the future, it's one where we're starting to see people just more interested in where their food comes from, in, the transparency of that, for example, in the US, a lot of the fish, more than half even, that's caught in the US goes offshore, often in places like Asia to be processed and then comes back to the US. I mean, and in doing so, there's this whole convoluted sort of, foods chain system where we don't really know where our fish comes from, if it's the same sort of, fish that we think it is when we order it. This has been studied many times, at least in the US, and it's a real problem. I think just people, having more clarity around what it is that they're consuming, where that comes from, what the nutrients are that's in it, what are the contaminants that we are sometimes used to having in our food system, that now with alternatives like Hooked Foods or Wildtype, like how that's able to solve a lot of these problems. I think it just creates more choice, and when there's more choice like this, like we were saying earlier, if people sort of still have this desire for fish that come out of the ocean, and if there are fishermen who are true stewards of the seas, I mean, they should be able to command a very high price for that, because it is such a precious product. And at the same time, we are trying to come up with just alternative sources for this as our, population just increases and increases.
Yeah. And both of you are still very much at the start of the journey. We're all at the start of this journey. So what's next for you? And then what are you looking for in terms of help or collaborations to make it happen? Arye, maybe we can start with you, then turn it to Tom.
Yeah, for collaborations, first of all, it's things like this. I mean, I feel really honored to be part of, conversations like this, and meeting more people who are, passionate about food, who are interested to learn more about our food system. So I'd say that the collaborations are mostly in the food world. I've always wanted to position ourselves as a food company, which is not, which makes sense. But I think, many, particularly early on in our space, were sort of positioning the companies as more of very fascinating science projects. And while it's very cool technology, in the end, I think that for customers to really have a hunger for these kinds of foods and want to keep ordering it, it needs to be great food. And so this is something we're always looking for. Everything from, chefs to restaurateurs to just, people who care about food and about the sort of, mission, and telling that story through food itself.
Yeah, and for Hooked Foods, I think we are right now we're raising a seed round. So any investors who are interested to join our journey, please get in contact. We're closing the round 1st of July. Otherwise, of course, we're looking for more collaborations with customers, both in the grocery but also in the food service space. We're focusing mainly on Sweden right now. So please reach out. And exactly as Arye says, like, it needs to be, food in the end of the day is a lot about joy. It's an experience you're having with friends. It's a social experience that, it needs to taste great. And, it doesn't, and we can't do that on our own entirely. We need great chefs and restaurants and other players to create those kind of experience together. So that's also something we're seeking. And of course, if there's any talented people that wants to work for purpose-driven startups, we're also recruiting. So both on the product development side, but also on the commercial side. So just get in touch.
We have about 3 minutes left, and I know we had only a short amount of time, and I could ask you both 1,001 questions. So I want to just open up and hear if you have any closing remarks, anything I didn't ask you that you want to share with the audience, and then we'll wrap up. Whoever wants to start can start.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I mean, if you're in Sweden, in Stockholm, please visit Mahalo, Hawaii Poke, or any of the other restaurants where we're at currently, and give it a try. I think tasting is believing, so just giving a first taste and try of Hooked Foods. And if you have any feedback on the product, we would love to hear it as well. And you can find where we are available on our website, of course, and so on. But
how can someone give you feedback if they dare? How should they get in touch to give you feedback?
We would love that. Yeah.
All right, Arye, what about you?
I was going to say something very similar, which is, first of all, I hope that someday, we can have events together and sort of, like showcase this whole spectrum of what people who, care about this field are able to bring through these different approaches. Like, with food, there's so many ways to just be so artistic about everything from cell-based to plant-based and so forth. And likewise, please reach out if you're in San Francisco. We'd love for you also to come see how the fish is made, where it's made, and we want to be very open with that always. And so please, if this is something that you're interested in, please reach out to us. We always love to continue these conversations, hope that this can move forward in this way.
All right. Thank you both. We'll say goodbye and wave and let them take it over. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thanks so much, everyone.